Welcome everybody to this podcast. This is supported by Chartered Association of Business Schools. In this podcast, we'll be discussing how AI has been reshaping the higher education landscape and the challenges and opportunities that it provides in delivering authentic learning experiences. Of course, there has been a lot of heated debate with advocates and skeptics offering contrasting views of AI. However, in our podcast, we'll take the discussion further by exploring new skill sets that current and future educators need to develop to navigate the complexities of incorporating AI in teaching and learning. At the same time, while integrating the academic integrity in the higher education context. I'm delighted to welcome my colleagues who are experts in teaching and learning and student experience at Sheffield Business School, Sheffield Hallam University. I'm Sandar Win. I'm the head of division for economics and finance. And I will now ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Gina Thornley, course leader for financial training here at Sheffield Business School.
I'm Jen Ruffle, I'm teaching and learning lead.
And I'm Zoe Newsham, I'm the internationalisation lead, or one of them within Sheffield Business School.
Thank you for the introduction. It will allow the audience to understand what we'll be discussing in this podcast. So before further ado, we'll discuss about some of the new skill sets which are required by educators in the higher education setting to embrace AI. So Gina, would you like to have a go first?
Yeah, of course. So I'll first look at some of the assumptions that AI has brought into the industry, particularly in education, as we try to navigate it as educators and particularly students as well, and the kind of skill sets that we'll need to come up against these assumptions. So the one that comes mainly hand in hand with AI use in education is that it's cheating. So that comes from a range of different things like media outlets, from students themselves and particularly from academics, and that's quite a traditional perspective. It links in with things like academic integrity. And I suppose the skills that educators are going to need to be able to navigate that are understanding how to sort of take those media outlets and what they're producing and take their own view on it, as opposed to, you know, looking at whichever media outlet it be and solely using that as guidance. So using the institution itself more so to be able to guide that, and the protocols that we put in place, and looking out to other universities and looking at how they're taking upon those assumptions. The traditional sort of academic perspective around academic integrity, there'll be a bit more about this in terms of how we can use it in assessment a bit later on in the podcast, but that integrity, how we look to upkeep that, as opposed to just say, you know, academic integrity has been quashed. That's the assumption if AI is used. So it's looking at those and navigating them and understanding, you know, when have students cheated and what does that look like, and being able to spot that, forming your own opinions whilst we've got all this sort of media frenzy going on around AI, and supporting students to understand that as well. So having the skill set to do that. But there's some parts, you know, of how it can be looked into ethically and the academic integrity and pedagogy that's going to be covered by Jane, my colleague here.
Yeah.
So moving on to the ethics and the academic integrity. I mean, there is an awful lot around the ethics behind AI that people need to be aware of, and the staff need to be aware of, and that students need to be aware of. And that is one of the kind of the benchmarks that we need to go by. That there is a lot of ethical considerations in how the information is got into the AI, and how who's used to get that information in, and how current it is, and the biases that are integrated into that. So that's the first thing that we need to make sure that educators understand, those biases and the ethics behind it, and make sure that they are comfortable discussing that and explaining that to students, so the students understand it as well. With regard to the academic integrity, we need to be clear on how it's used and how we can get students to use it, so that it's not damaging the academic integrity, but it is keeping the academic integrity fundamental to the studies, whilst using it as a tool to enhance the academic integrity. So they can be using the AI to actually generate things that will actually help them And then they can then critically evaluate that. So they're actually in themselves questioning the academic integrity of AI. So it kind of takes it a full circle.
So can I just say that what you're saying here is that we need to educate our students so that they are ready to challenge the academic integrity of the documents which are produced by AI. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But the only way of educating the students is to first educate the
Yeah, of
educators,
course,
they need
yeah.
to educate the staff, the academics,
Yeah.
to know what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Indeed. And it's a very kind of complex problem, because there's academics who have no knowledge, there's some that have got loads of knowledge, and that's what we need to actually embrace. And rather than villainising
Yeah.
AI, we need to
Yeah.
embrace it as a tool that we can use. And that takes me on to the next bit, which is pedagogy and how we can use it. We need to think how we can use AI to support students, and we need to think how we can use it in the teaching and in the assessment. Understanding what and when you use that AI. So I think it goes back to the training of staff. No two modules, no two topic areas will be exactly the same in how they're going to use AI necessarily. But they need to understand what the possibilities are, so we can evaluate which is the best way to use AI in a kind of structured format, in a scaffolding of students' learning, so they can use it through the teaching, and then students can then embrace it in their assessment. And I think we do need to be very clear on kind of some sort of protocols around that, which we're currently involved in a project which is looking at those. But I think protocols around how staff can use it and when they use it is imperative to this being a success and people embracing it.
I think that's really important from university to university as well, because not one size will fit all. So we'll have our own protocols here at Sheffield Hallam Business School, but it might be a different culture and a different feel. Or, for example, we're applied learning, it might be a very different feel at a different university. So, you know,
more pure.
So taking that with a view of getting your own protocols out of it, not just sort of you can look to other universities to see, well, what are they doing, but catering it to your own culture and what kind of education you've got going on there.
So what we are saying is that the universities need to work together for continuous professional development, CPD programs for our educators, isn't it?
But as part of that CPD, I think this leads nicely on to what you're going to talk about. The digital skills that are required.
Exactly.
The digital skills that are required by academics, like we mentioned before, if we're asking academics to educate students in AI, they need to understand the tool themselves before they can even consider educating students in it. A lot of the AI that we're seeing coming forward, and remember, it's only going to get more and more advanced. It's not going to go backwards. It's only going to get more advanced. This is technology beyond anything that's been used by academics in the past. So even academics who consider themselves technology literate, who are confident with Padlets and Slidos, this is the next step. People who need to understand how to use the tool themselves, how it's being used by students on their modules. We can't ask academics to spot the use of AI if they don't know what they're looking for. There's so much that is now out there.
Can I just add into that? I mean, one, you said about knowing how students are going to use it, and one of the things is that students are using it in secondary school, and they're being encouraged to use it as a secondary school. So suddenly being kind of almost be demonized when they come to university seems kind of quite ridiculous, and I think it makes students question the legitimacy of studying higher education if we don't embrace this technology. And the second thing is relating to staff, and that is the speed of the change of this technology, because what AI is now compared with what it was
even a year ago.
It's advanced so much in that time, and it's only going to continue on that kind of natural momentum as more people adopt it and more people use it, and it learns more from the people using it.
And the more students that come to us as it's being used in secondary schools, their knowledge is already going to be far beyond the academics who are teaching them. So we do need to see some continuous professional development around AI, the tools, and how it is developing and what's next. What we need to be doing is getting in front of this, not constantly lagging behind.
Yeah.
So as academics, we need to catch up fast and overtake what's going on out there, really.
I think we also need to work with our researchers who have been working AI research, and that ensure that these knowledge are embedded to our skills development, and not only in our education or teaching only, but also in our skills development. Okay, so the next part that we'll be discussing is about AI opportunities within the education. So Zoe, you can continue with your discussion about how we can embrace the usage of AI.
Yeah, I really think that we do need to be embracing AI, not just accepting that it's being used, but actually opening up to the opportunities that are available as educators. So what can AI bring to your teaching? What can it bring to your module? What can it bring to your module development? Rather than, I like the word Jane used earlier, villainising AI and making it this big scary thing.
Yeah.
What we need to be doing is opening up and embracing it and keeping up with the technology. And it's not just what AI can do, it's the skills that are needed to embrace AI. If we tomorrow could make it the university's policy that we embrace AI, what does that mean for academics? How can they make sure that they personally embrace it on their module? What can it do for them? If you've got academics who have never even looked at ChatGPT before, how do we take them from a position of AI is this big scary cheating tool to I want to use it on my module, I want it to be so commonplace that I don't have to be hunting out students who are covertly using it, because everyone's using it to make their work better, to make their teaching better, to make the student experience better.
Just as we were talking about earlier about the fact that it's very different depending on what piece of work it is, what module it is, what university it is. It's also what each member of staff needs, because there were some who are at the very beginning of this learning curve, and then there's some who are partway up it, some who are towards the top of it. So it's just about making sure that we've got different and varied training, for the different needs of different staff members.
I think it goes back a little bit to the
Almost
assumptions.
personalised.
The assumption that, for example, everybody will be on the same sort of place in terms of like what they know about AI tools. That's not the case. We've seen that in our own business school. So I think other business schools will probably need to go, where is everybody at, and what's the baseline we'd like everybody to be at, and change that it being villainised into a more of a positive conversation and creating that positive culture around it.
I mean, like, you can continue your discussion about how AI can also provide, the critical understanding for our students.
So there's opportunities that, we could embed it in either assessment or the way that our students produce their work. So it can allow them to produce guidelines or skeletons. And in doing that, students can review what that output looks like and its validity. This is going to give them a level of critical reviewing, and it allows them to adapt deep learning skills that sometimes we don't often see, as per research, in business schools. It's not apparent deep learning, and it's something that we work on to try and embed. So it's an opportunity to actually get some of that in, which is a brilliant opportunity. Tools like ChatGPT can prompt students to ask better questions, and therefore just constantly be critically analysing what's coming out of that output, which are all the skills that we traditionally want to get out of pieces of work. But this might be a way of doing it without them even knowing. We're not asking them to doing it. They're just naturally getting it out of it. So it's a good opportunity.
That's a very good idea.
I mean, one thing that we need to be conscious of is the fact that we are talking about generative AI in general, not just a specific AI. It's the fact that there are so many different platforms is also an important thing.
And I talk about its use in assessment, but I know, Jane, you're our teaching and learning expert, so you've got more on assessment and creating assessments with AI, so I'll leave this one to you.
I mean, one of the things I think related to assessment, but not directly, is about making sure that we're putting AI in modules early on. So not just for the assessments, it's about embedding it throughout a module so they understand how AI can be used as a tool to enhance their learning,
Yeah.
to enhance their assessment.
Yeah.
So it's not just, you know, we're coming up to an assessment point, let's start using AI. No, it's about, you know, this is what it can do.
Yeah.
And this is what it can produce. But in terms of assessment, it doesn't matter which platform it is. It's got opportunities for us, and we can either do it in form of actually students putting pieces in there and use it as a prompt to create skeletons and things like that, or it can be used to actually academics can put it in to create assessment pieces, or it can create questions from pieces of say case studies, etc. And it can generate questions which can then get students thinking more broadly around the topic area, rather than perhaps looking quite specifically at the answers to questions. It could help them generate a more rich environment for students to study in. It can create a kind of quite an authentic learning, because no two pieces will be exactly the same. So it might be what prompts they put in. So they may have to register which prompts they put into AI to get their assessment to generate their assessment, and then what they do with that. So it's actually making them think a little bit more and a little bit broader. So I think it can be used both in the creation of assessment and in the assessment piece itself. But we need to make sure we know what's being used and how it's being used. And I think
I think we need to be in control of it rather than letting it get away.
Yes.
Yeah. That's where we need to talk about the skills development, isn't it? Where we need to support our colleagues or educators in understanding how to control AI in the education settings, so that it doesn't go beyond, you know.
Because there is so much fear of it, and the fear is the fear of unknown.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've got to try and dispel and kind of navigate around.
Because AI is seen as this big scary tool
Exactly.
that is taking over our student assessments and
Affecting all the academic integrity.
there's no academic integrity, and it's a huge barrier because students just put a question in there and then hand us the answer to be marked. Because we've got these huge preconceived ideas, the way in which it could be used is being lost. The things we could do, and it's actually a really exciting development that could completely revolutionise the way we're teaching, what we're teaching, and how we're teaching it.
Even down to like the deep learning and how they could sort of adopt that technique. It would be really beneficial to particularly business school students.
I mean, this is going on to some of the what we're going to discuss in the barriers to AI implementation. So that's about those preconceived ideas and trying to combat them, and understanding that this is just another tool. I mean, we've got things.
What's the difference between using AI and using Grammarly or Studiosity, like students are encouraged to use? So on one hand, we're encouraging this use, but not that one. That's the bad one. Stay away from that one. Whereas what we could be doing is teaching them how to use it in an appropriate manner, because these are students who are doing the 3 or the 4 years with us, then they'll be off out into the world, and what they've learned here they'll be taking with them. So if we've encouraged appropriate use, that's something they're going to take forward with them.
And we are an applied university, and they will be able to use this in the real world. It's creating them a skill set to understand the limitations of it, so they don't actually just put things in and get things out and just take that as a truth. And understanding what's real and what's not real.
So we do need it to be part of their skill set, and but to do that, academics need to make it, going back to the original, academics need to make it part of their skill set to start with, because having AI that's used covertly because it's considered cheating, it's not going to be the way it's used in industry. I've got my background's in industry. We would be using any and all tools available to make our days better, our information better, our work as embracing as possible. And that's what our students are going to be doing when they leave us. So us teaching them that it's something that they shouldn't be using. Isn't the
a
life
lazy
they're going to be
tool.
living? We should be
Yeah.
preparing students for life they'll be living when they leave us,
Yeah.
not for what we want them to be doing,
Yeah.
for the way the world is.
We'll prepare them with tools like Excel because it's really efficient
Yeah,
for businesses
exactly.
to use Excel instead of, pen to paper. But we know that they'll use these kinds of tools again for efficiencies.
But when you're talking about skill set, I mean, for academics, as I said, it can be used for creating assessment questions, for creating multiple choice banks. It can be an efficiency for staff. And it
But
can
only
be,
if we can get away from it being seen as this big scary thing that's going to ruin higher
Yeah.
education, and
Yeah.
everyone's PhD thesis are going to be written by AI.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that there has got to be, in all of this, in the barriers, there has got to be acknowledgement of some of the inequalities that it
Yeah.
does bring. And it's a barrier in itself, but with acknowledgement, it suddenly, it doesn't become a barrier anymore because you've got
Yeah.
that knowledge of it. Things like some of the AI tools, they have tiered pricing systems, which of course, if we have students that have got access to more funding or financial means, that means they would be able to access those higher tiers and maybe more up-to-date data and maybe what would be considered at the end product a better quality piece of work. So we've kind of got to look at the tools that are available while we think about what modules they might go into and how they're going to be used.
I suppose you have to consider whether you dictate which tool to use, so that you've got a kind of level playing field.
And on top of that, we have to, and it goes back to when we were talking about students and their different sort of skill sets themselves. That is exactly in the same place of inequalities within using and a barrier of AI, because students physically may not have the skill set, a digital skill set, to be able to use any of the tools. Others may be excelling in that right now. So there is not a level playing field at the moment. And I know I will pass on to my international expert for this, Zoe, but international students come from a very different perspective from experience. So if you want to talk a little bit about
Well, I think it's up to us to level the playing field, like it's always been, in the way when we've used any other technology. If students haven't got access to laptops, then we've provided them. If students haven't had access to any number of things, it's been provided by the university to level the playing field. So I think that's down to us. But you're right, considering the viewpoint of international students and how AI is potentially being used in their home countries compared to how we want it to be used, we need to make sure that we're being very open and clear to international students about what's acceptable here, what we expect and what's acceptable to us. And I'm not sure the policies have been clear enough in that respect yet.
Well, there is a lot of cultural differences. So you've got people from particular cultures who believe that, criticality with an esteemed academic's work is
the worst thing that they could do would be
to
question their lecturer, to have a difference in opinion, because they've come from backgrounds where the lecturer's opinion is law. This is the right opinion, and having a difference of opinion and voicing that would be the worst possible thing they could do and a guaranteed fail. Whereas that's not really what we encourage.
I think there's an opportunity there as well, as we've got that sort of side. We've got maybe an opportunity to learn and get best practice from some of our international students. They may be coming from places that have got some really great ideas about use of AI. So I think opening that conversation up, and we talk about bringing students into our development of modules and letting them have a voice in assessment, and this is a perfect way of saying, oh, so you're really an expert in AI. Tell me what kind of things you can get from that. Or our international students, what do you do back at home? Is there something that we can learn from? And it brings in that sort of educator and student conversation, which can only enhance and develop.
I think linked to that, it would be very interesting to understand how they've used it thus far. So if they've been encouraged to use it at secondary schools or in other countries, how? And what have they got?
And is the use of it talked about, or is it more covert and not something that is discussed?
Do you think that we all also have a language barrier? Can language barrier faced by the international students be?
I think that is possibly a reason why some international students go down a particular route, which I think it could significantly help with, in that it gives the criticality of their voice and can reframe some of the things.
Shows that structure and gives that sort of skeleton and guideline.
That's
Yeah.
it.
So yeah, it can help, but AI will only answer what it's put in. So the students, if they're studying their second language, if they don't phrase the sentence or the question particularly well, the answer that they get out of it is not necessarily going to be great either.
But then perhaps that comes back to the assessment construction, and in the, you know, these are the prompts that you should put in. Then the what you get assessed on is how you kind of change that once it comes back out to you, as to how you know, evaluate what's been written, and how you move on from that. But that leads us on to the last item, which is inaccuracy in the tool. This is quite a fundamental thing. It's AI, for its great joy, does create its own version of reality sometimes. If it has got a gap in its knowledge, it creates that knowledge, which is quite useful if you want to do a research project, but perhaps not so much if it's citing something which doesn't actually exist as a citation. So I think, I mean, again, that could be used by staff to encourage students to kind of critically evaluate what's been written, because they would then perhaps have to go back to the original text to see whether that was actually written by her, and that could be used as a tool. It's also the fact that the inaccuracy comes from the fact that it's historical data, so some of that is no longer accurate with regard to world affairs nowadays, and the fact that it's outdated, because it's mainly back to 2021 information. I don't know if the paid ones are more accurate, but certainly from what I've seen. But also the fact is it creates its own version of reality based on its knowledge. So if it's got an idea of, I don't know, a park or whatever, it will create its own version of that reality, which isn't always true. And I think students need to question certainly the legitimacy of the answers it produces.
I think that goes back to the critical review. So it forces students, well, not forces, but it produces an output, and they have to go into it and seeing that, like I say, it could go back to assessment. Are we asking them to go a bit deeper into references? Referencing has usually been, sometimes you would get feedback, well, you'll always get feedback on how you've referenced, but could that be flipped on its head of saying, you've had this output, now go and find out if actually you know, these references are true to form.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Georgina, Jay, and Zoe for participating in this conversation. So in summary, what we're saying is that don't villainize the AI and embrace it. I'm sure that we have got a lot of conversations to continue outside of this conversation. And thank you very much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.